This section is called the stages from man, lowercase m, to man, uppercase M. So, the process of humankind's ascension from our animal state to the human state is a central concept of all the religions of God. And it sheds further light as well on the concept of human, the human kingdom. This passage is from the selections of the writings of Abdullah.
The suckling babe passeth through various physical stages, growing and developing at every stage until its body reacheth the age of maturity. Having arrived at this stage, it acquireth the capacity to manifest spiritual and intellectual perfections. The lights of comprehension, intelligence, and knowledge become perceptible in it, and the powers of its soul unfold. Similarly, in the contingent world, the human species hath undergone progressive physical changes and, by a slow process, hath scaled the ladder of civilization, realizing in itself the wonders, excellencies, and gifts of humanity in their most glorious form, until it gained the capacity to express the splendors of spiritual perfections and divine ideals, and become capable of hearkening to the call of God. Then, at last, the call of the kingdom was raised, the spiritual virtues and perfections were revealed, the sun of reality dawned, and the teachings of the most great peace, of the oneness of the world of humanity, and of the universality of men were promoted.
Please, if you get the chance, read this quote again. So he gives this analogy of the suckling babe, of a child who is growing and developing. He then takes this analogy and he looks at the human species. Similarly, the human species hath undergone progressive physical changes. And, by a slow process, scaled a ladder of civilization, realizing in itself the wonders, excellencies, and gifts of humanity. Okay, so it underwent slow physical changes. And there came a point, where humanity began to scale, by a slow process, the ladder of civilization, where we began to realize excellencies and gifts of our potentiality. And then it says, until it gained the capacity to express the splendors of spiritual perfections and divine ideals, and to hearken unto the call of God. So we had this process, not to beat a dead horse here, but we had us moving through all the kingdoms, through a process of evolution, with slow physical changes, until we came to a place where we then began to scale the ladder of civilization. So we are animal, and then we began to by a slow process, actually scale the ladder of civilization, slowly realizing the capacities that we have, expanding our intellects, more deeply understanding things, until it gained the capacity to express spiritual perfections. Now, and then it says, then at last the call of the kingdom was raised. So in a weird sense, we were biological animals, and then we became, if you will, semi-civilized man, and then more civilized man, and then we slowly, as humankind began to ascend, we reached this point where we began to really sort of penetrate the mysteries of the universe and begin to actually live out lives of honesty and dignity and justice, and to bring those into, remember, organizing our governments and taking on different value sets and different, if you will, perceptions of beauty and virtue, and began to come in this. And then it says, then at last the kingdom. At last the call of the kingdom of God was raised, to when finally we were brought into larger and larger faith communities, until, from a Baha'i perspective, we will come to that place when the planet itself will become one. And it's interesting, even in that context, I don't have the passage here, but it's from Promulgation of Universal Peace, where Abdu'l-Baha says, once we become united, once we finally truly understood the oneness of humankind and we have joined together, he actually says that the sciences of this day will become the playthings of children. And that might sound shocking to some people, but actually the sciences of the 19th century look very much like the playthings of children to us. And our evolution, which is not biologically based, it's conceptually based, it's the rational faculty of humankind and our ability to organize economies and societies, etc., and understand the mysteries of the universe, is actually exponentially jumping. We're evolving rapidly, technologically and evolutionarily, although in some sense, spiritually, we still have far to go. But these things will, once we finally become united, become the playthings of children again. This next section is called The Appearance of Man. That's the major section. Our first part is Man is an emergent property, according to the Baha'i writings.
Moreover, these members, these elements, this composition, which are found in the organism of man, are an attraction and magnet for the spirit. It is certain that the spirit will appear in it. So, a mirror which is clear will certainly attract the rays of the sun. It will become luminous, and wonderful images will appear in it. That is to say, when these existing elements are gathered together according to the natural order and with perfect strength, they become a magnet for the spirit, and the spirit will become manifest in them with all its perfections. Under these conditions, it cannot be said, "What is the necessity for the rays of the sun to descend upon the mirror?" For the connection which exists between the reality of things, whether they be spiritual or material, requires that when the mirror is clear and faces the sun, the light of the sun must become apparent in it. In the same way, when the elements are arranged and combined in the most glorious system, organization, and manner, the human spirit will appear and be manifest in them. This is the decree of the powerful, the wise.
Just like at the beginning of the universe, there was no water, right? Until a proper combination of hydrogen and oxygen came together, we suddenly had the properties of water, which are neither the properties of hydrogen or oxygen. That is an emergent property. It has to do with the composition and the arrangement of certain elements, which in reality, if you think about it, all of the elements of the periodic table are themselves emergent properties. They are not the properties of protons, neutrons, and electrons. They are actually something that comes about through the organization and structure of them. And that humankind itself is like this. He says that this organism of man, and we've seen the definition of human kingdom or the human spirit, that when they're arranged just so, it is capable of reflecting the human capacities. That's why I was saying previously it is a functional definition, because is it in the sense that we're stating that this is the only combination and the only arrangement of these elements that can actually produce this intellect? No, we've seen that previously. That there are many different conscious beings from the perspective of the Baha'i writings. So we have a biological man at first, which we know emerges through a long, slow process of physical changes and evolution from the animal kingdom. And as that form becomes perfected, we begin to see rational man. And this really is exactly what we already believe today, that mankind was an animal, and physically still is an animal. But that some time ago, humankind began to understand tools, be able to think about their world, to self-reflect, and to slowly develop through that gradual process, and then began to ascend the ladder of civilization. Again, Abdu'l-Baha states this in some answered questions.
Finally, the perfection of each individual being, that is to say, the perfection which you now see in man or apart from him, with regard to their atoms, members, or powers, is due to the composition of the elements, to their measure, to their balance, to the mode of their combination, and to mutual influence. When all these are gathered together, then man exists.
And remember, we saw that this happened according to a natural order, slow process, evolution, physical changes, that it's all within this one cosmos, this one ultimate, physical cosmos with natural order and natural law, that when these elements are composed and they are brought into this type of arrangement, and then it's capable of reflecting the capacity of rational thought.
By a divine power of creation, the elements assemble together in affinity, and the result is a composite being. Certain of these elements have united, and man has come into existence. Certain other combinations produce plants and animals. Therefore, this affinity of the inanimate elements is the cause of life and being. Through their commingling, therefore, human affinity, love, and fellowship are made possible. If the elements were not assembled together in affinity to produce the body of man, the higher intelligent forces could not be manifest in the body. But when these elements separate, when their affinity and cohesion are overcome, death and dissolution of the body they have built inevitably follow. Therefore, affinity and unity among even these material elements mean life in the body of man, and their discord and disagreement mean death. Throughout all creation, in all the kingdoms, this law is written, that love and affinity are the cause of life, and discord and separation are the cause of death. Consider the bodies of all the natural organisms. Certain elements have gathered and combined in chemical affinity. The tree, the man, the fish, are due to this attraction and cohesion which have brought the elements together. A composition or composite being has resulted. The outcome of certain atomic grouping, for instance, is a mirror, table, or clock, because a cohesive power has magnetized and bound these atoms together. When that attracting power is withdrawn, dissolution and disintegration follow. No mirror, table, or clock remain. No trace, no existence. Therefore, commingling of the atoms brings forth a reality, while dispersion or dissemination of them is equivalent to non-existence.
So we already believe that there was a time when there was no life on the planet. Abdu'l-Baha has stated that these species did not exist, and that there was even a time when this terrestrial globe did not exist. But that there was this affinity, if you will, of the inanimate elements that was the cause, and again, according to natural order, an affinity of the inanimate elements that caused life and being. Life and being. And it says, if the elements were not assembled together in an affinity to produce the body of man, the higher intelligent forces could not be manifest in the body. So we needed this first combination, which was the power of life itself. That there was an affinity within the elements themselves that were inanimate, that composed to create life, and that if these elements were then composed differently, if their arrangement and organization and balance, as it was stated in the quote previously, to their measure, balance, mode of their combination into mutual influence, then you had the power of growth, and then you had the power of sense understanding, the definition of the animal kingdom, and that when they came together in a higher level composition, then it could reflect the spirit of man. And they could not be manifest without this fundamental composition of lower elements. So the foundation, the physical form, is prior and is essential for the emergence of conscious entities. But I think pretty much everyone believes that. We, the term philosophically is supervene, the rational faculty is itself dependent upon the anatomy and the physical biological structure and chemical affinity and composition of the elements of a body in order for it to manifest. Yet that does not mean that it's not real. That is the reality of what humankind is, and were we to find that capacities or that group of capacities within an organism that has no biological lineage, like common with our own, I would still say, well, basically they're human. And that is what Abdu'l-Baha is saying.
The virtues of humanity are many, but science is the most noble of them all. The distinction which man enjoys above and beyond the station of the animal is due to this paramount virtue. It is a bestowal of God. It is not material. It is divine. Science is an effulgence of the sun of reality, the power of investigating and discovering the verities of the universe, the means by which man finds a pathway to God. All the powers and attributes of man are human and hereditary in origin, outcomes of nature's processes, except the intellect, which is supernatural. Through intellectual and intelligent inquiry, science is the discoverer of all things. It unites present and past, reveals the history of bygone nations and events, and confers upon man today the essence of all human knowledge and attainment throughout the ages. By intellectual processes and logical deductions of reason, this superpower in man can penetrate the mysteries of the future and anticipate its happenings. Science is the first emanation from God toward man. All created beings embody the potentiality of material perfection, but the power of intellectual investigation and scientific acquisition is a higher virtue specialized to man alone. Other beings and organisms are deprived of this potentiality and attainment. God has created or deposited this love of reality in man. The development and progress of a nation is according to the measure and degree of that nation's scientific attainments. Through this means, its greatness is continually increased, and day by day the welfare and prosperity of its people are assured. All blessings are divine in origin, but none can be compared with this power of intellectual investigation and research, which is an eternal gift producing fruits of unending delight. Man is ever partaking of these fruits. All other blessings are temporary. This is an everlasting possession. Even sovereignty has its limitations and overthrow. This is a kingship and dominion which none may usurp or destroy. Briefly, it is an eternal blessing and divine bestowals, the supreme gift of God to man. Therefore, you should put forward your most earnest efforts toward the acquisition of science and arts. The greater your attainment, the higher your standard in the divine purpose. The man of science is perceiving and endowed with vision, whereas he who is ignorant and neglectful of this development is blind. The investigating mind is attentive, alive. The callous and indifferent mind is deaf and dead. A scientific man is a true index and representative of humanity, for through processes of inductive reasoning and research, he is informed of all that appertains to humanity, its status, conditions, and happenings. He studies the human body politic, understands social problems, and weaves the web and texture of civilization. In fact, science may be likened to a mirror, wherein the infinite forms and images of existing things are revealed and reflected. It is the very foundation of all individual and national development. Without this basis of investigation, development is impossible. Therefore, seek with diligent endeavor the knowledge and attainment of all that lies within the power of this wonderful bestowal. The ideal faculties of man, including the capacity for scientific acquisition, are beyond nature's ken. These are powers whereby man is differentiated and distinguished from all other forms of life. This is the bestowal of divine idealism, the crown adorning human heads. Notwithstanding the gift of this supernatural power, it is most amazing that materialists still consider themselves within the bonds and captivity of nature.
We have seen this theme, the larger theme, once again brought up. Science is the most noble virtue of humankind. The distinction that man enjoys above and beyond the station of the animal is due to this paramount virtue. Again, he's trying to focus us back again on this functional capacity of humankind. Whereas the other attributes of man are hereditary in origin, the outcome of nature's processes, except the intellect, which is supernatural. And this is very, very interesting that we find within the Baha'i writings. The term supernatural itself seems to have a radically different meaning. I'm not sure, forgive me if I have a quote in this quote bank, because he actually states that humankind are supernatural to animals, which are supernatural to plants, which are supernatural to minerals. It's because from the perspective of the mineral, because you can't have a perspective, there is in some sense no growth, no sense organs, and no rational faculty of scientific penetration that it has any access to. So it is above its nature. Likewise, the idea, if one could have, a fern could have such a thing, of sight and of sound, and you know what I mean, of smell and of taste, are completely nonsensical, inaccessible really, to the plant. The animal itself, I've often made this comment that if I'm sitting there, I actually have 2 dogs and 2 cats for that matter, and I'm standing around them doing a talk like this. Actually, my dogs are just over there, and they have no access whatsoever to anything that I'm saying unless I say walk, ball, food through the conditioning of those patterns. They couldn't understand anything if I'm talking about the most simplest and mundane concepts. They can't understand even something as like, possibly Matt's my friend, might come tomorrow for a cup of coffee. That entire array of concepts is inaccessible to them. It is supernatural. And because this capacity, which is dependent upon the prior existence of the physical organism that can actually manifest this emergent property, is written into the very laws of the universe, it is supernatural from that sense. And this is important to note. The laws of the universe that we live in are obviously such that the potentiality for a conscious being who reflects upon the sciences and religion and who can actually utilize technological devices to communicate to you was possible within the laws of nature from the beginning, or else I couldn't be talking to you right now. So yes, all of these fundamental structures have to be there. Remember, he mentioned like the clock and the watch, etc., and the mirror. They have to be there and to be composed of the physical elements and arranged in such a perfect way, or in such a way that those qualities, like the quality of a camera, can actually manifest, just like the rational faculty of man, who once manifested, can then penetrate the mysteries of the universe and draw out secrets like a video recorder or build the internet for that matter. It is here that I mentioned this earlier, where Abdu'l-Baha states, the greater your attainment, because he says, you should put forward your most earnest efforts towards the acquisition of sciences and arts. The greater your attainment, the higher your standard in the divine purpose. This is fascinating. The greater your attainment in the sciences and the arts, the higher your standard in the divine purpose. He says a scientific man is a true index and representative of humanity. For through processes of inductive reasoning and research, he is informed of all that appertains to humanity, its status, conditions, happenings. He studies the human body politic, understands social problems, and weaves the web and texture of civilization. So this supreme gift of God to humankind is this rational faculty that enables us to use inductive reasoning, as Abdu'l-Baha said, to actually gather facts and penetrate and see beyond our sense impressions. And this makes the reason why a scientific man is a true index of humanity is because that is the definition that Abdu'l-Baha uses for humanity. This is once again why I state that there is a peculiar irony. Over and over and over in my interactions on firesides, which are Baha'i conversations with members not of the Baha'i faith, or in social conversations, or what I've seen online where Abdu'l-Baha is being castigated for his lack of respect for science, is that the very fundamental point Abdu'l-Baha is trying to make is we're not paying enough attention to the scientific capacity of humankind. That when we only look at the physical progress or of our bodies, or only the material progress, and we are only interested and focused on our physical relationship with other primates because we are a primate, then we're missing the very foundation of what humankind is. That's why it's ironic, because he's saying, no, you're saying that you're not, I am not properly respecting or honoring the scientific achievements of humankind, but my point is you're not properly respecting or honoring the scientific achievements of humankind because you think we're like everything else.